Thank you everyone for joining the International Development Committee's one-off session on the impact of Hurricane Melissa on Jamaica and also the UK's response to it. We're also going to be broadening the session to look at what the government can be doing going forwards when it comes to obligations and duties specifically to small island developing states. Hurricane Melissa hit land, I think, on the 28th of October last year. We watched with horror the devastation that it wreaked on your country, and also it is chilling to see the long-lasting impact, particularly to infrastructure, homes, and the sort of future economically, and the cost of what you're going to have to deal with. So thank you for joining us today. I wonder if we could start, panellists, with you introducing yourself. UnaMay, could I ask you to introduce yourself and your organisation, please?
Well, thank you again, Chair and Committee, for the opportunity to appear before you. I'm UnaMay Gordon. I previously served as the Principal Director of Climate Change in the Government of Jamaica. I am involved in the climate change negotiations and the international climate action at the level of the COP and so. I am currently a senior associate of the IIED, IIED, which is based there in the UK, and so do quite a bit of work with the national government still across the region. Previously was the chair of the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center. I currently serve as the co-chair of the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator. So just working on a lot of the governance issue at the time and the finance issues within the wider climate change sphere. And I leave it there.
Thank you.
And ask committee to Google UnaMay Gordon.
Thank you, Una. And Dr. Rodriguez-Moodie, could I ask you to introduce yourself and your organisation?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Theresa Rodriguez-Moodie. I am the CEO for the Jamaica Environment Trust, which is a not-for-profit environmental non-government organization based in Kingston, Jamaica. And our mission is very broad, but it is to protect Jamaica's natural resources. And we do this using education, advocacy, and the law to influence individual and organizational behavior and public policy and practice. I will say confidently there is no other organization like JET in terms of the work that we do, and we are also considered the environmental watchdogs for Jamaica.
Thank you. And Dr. Brown, you wear many hats. Which one are you wearing for us today?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee, for inviting us here today. Thank you so much. My name is Dr. Andrew Brown. I'm Chief Executive of the Croydon Beamy Forum. Croydon Beamy Forum is a local charity which is based in Croydon, but deliver loads of different services in London, especially in the southwest London region, including services such as mental health and issues around cancer, but all particular around the global majority people within the southwest London areas. We do, as you said, have many different hats on, but today I'm here representing hopefully the community in Croydon, London and the UK with the things that happened over the last 3 months.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
UnaMay, could I start with you? What impact, both economically and to society, has the hurricane had on Jamaica?
Let me begin, Sarah, by just take the opportunity to thank you all, just individually and collectively, for the outpouring of support, solidarity, and response to the people of Jamaica during and after Melissa. I think that needs to be said from citizens like us, and also that what you saw on TV as you watched, on the ground, it seems much worse.
Yeah.
So in terms of the hurricane, what Melissa showed us, let me start at the impact, because I think that's where we need to start, and then we can go from end to end. Because no matter how prepared we were, her wrath would be felt anywhere. And I like to say Melissa was a system on steroids, if you understand that. And therefore we can only dream of lessening impact if we prepare. And I think what Melissa showed us, just saying that, is that it ticked all the boxes of what we've been talking about in the climate science arena, but also in the climate change discourse. There was just unprecedented destruction across the impacted communities, really. The rapid intensification that we speak about under these exceptionally favorable conditions, the Caribbean Sea, the conditions, and it was a direct impact, direct hit on the communities. The hurricane force winds and the excess rainfall, and therefore the results, both economically but socially, was catastrophic. And I like to say that every single Jamaican now knows the word catastrophic in the true sense. And therefore, what Melissa really showed us that there really are systemic challenges in the planning and recovery framework. And the long-standing vulnerabilities that we talk about were laid bare. And they remain really very naked as we speak and as I speak to the committee.
Una, I'm going to pause you because everything you're saying is very powerful, but what I need is less of the academic and more of on the ground. What are you left with now? So have people got electricity? Is the water systems intact?
Okay, all right.
The schools are working.
So let's go there, because in terms of context, that's the reason why we are left bare with the housing stock completely destroyed in the communities. The electricity, there are communities that are still left without electricity as we speak. The water system is back, most of it is back up, but we still have communities. The infrastructure, which is roads, are complete, communities are still cut off. And the financial and fiscal impact, which I like to say, is devastating. And therefore, how do we then recover from that? So let's pause there a little, Sarah, Auntie.
And presumably your sort of sources of income have been hugely compromised. I'm thinking about sort of farming exports. I'm thinking about tourists.
Well, on the economic sectors, agriculture, and the breadbasket, St. Elizabeth is the breadbasket of Jamaica. Agriculture in St. Elizabeth, direct impact, completely wiped out. There was panic in the communities and across Jamaica when after Melissa, there was just no food and still no vegetable for the entire population. That's still there. Tourism, which is one of the economic pillars, completely impacted. Hotels closed, completely wiped out, and therefore on livelihood, on the economic sector itself, because hotels are still closed in Westmoreland, in Montego Bay. There are hotels and chains across that are really still closed as we speak. And closed initially because they were damaged themselves, closed because there was no electricity, closed because there was no water, and closed because the persons, the labor for the hotels could not get to work. And these are people who were also impacted. So people were left completely homeless. if I can go there.
Thank you. Dr. Brown, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, totally agree with everything what UnaMay is saying. But if I could ask the committee just to maybe just close the eyes just for 10 seconds and just picture this. Picture the road that you live on. A picture that you went to sleep on Monday night. And then when you woke up on Monday, if there's 100 houses, if there were 100 houses on your road on Monday, you've now woken up and there's only 2 houses. That's how it is in St. Elizabeth. Mm-hmm. That's how it is in Black River. And when I went there in January, that's what I was faced with. I went there with a team of 5, and we were taken to a particular lady's house. And we were wondered why we were actually taken to that particular house. And then she called the people in the community to come round. And it was only afterwards when we looked around and we said, wait, this is the only house still standing. Mm-hmm. And because she was literally rebuilding the house, and it was made of concrete. All the other houses in the area were made of wood or made of, very flimsy material, and they were all wiped down. And that's why everyone in that community was literally hanging around that particular area. That was the only house in the whole area that had internet. When we were driving into Black River, within the first 8 minutes, people on the bus who were from the UK and from Kingston were complaining that we couldn't get our WhatsApp messages anymore. Now imagine living in Black River for the last 8 weeks without no internet service, without no WhatsApp, without no football schools, etc., etc. That's what they were living with in St. Elizabeth. And that's just how the practical it is. You've now woken up where you could have your schools, you have your library all washed away. You mentioned something about income as well. We met a particular guy called Michael, and he said, Dr. Brown, never met him before, but after him talking to us, he said, Dr. Brown, I need some help. So we said, okay, cool. So we said, what do you need? He said, listen, my children's school has been blown away. My workplace has been blown away. My house has been blown away. And he needs some income so that he can literally provide for his family. And that's just the practical of how it was on that particular day. But remember, we went literally 8 to 9 weeks after the event. Can you imagine the first 8 weeks of what happened? So with him, he's lucky enough, he managed to find a friend in the UK who set up a GoFundMe page. So he's now working on the GoFundMe page to try and get income so he can rebuild his house. We sent £50 down to him on Saturday so he can buy 50 more bricks for his house. And when we went there, not even one person asked us for money, which is very interesting. Everybody asked for torches, lamps, sanitary towels for ladies, and bricks and anything just to rebuild so that they can start rebuilding. Not one person asked for any money directly.
Wow. Dr. Rodriguez-Moodie, could I turn to you specifically about the community and the impact at community level? What have you seen going on?
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the responses that we've heard from UnaMay and from Dr. Brown. I think it's important that we can't talk about Hurricane Melissa without using the word trauma.
Exactly.
I lived through it, as I know many Jamaicans did. I was not in St. Elizabeth. I was not in some of the most affected communities, but I cannot watch a video or see an image and not be completely traumatized by that day. And I think that when I saw, I've been to several of the communities that have been hardest hit. Black River for one, for example. So while I did see several communities, several houses, for example, still standing, inside these homes have been gutted. I've heard stories of children being ripped. In one particular case, a child was ripped from his grandfather's arm and has not been seen since. We have a lot of people in communities that they have these big question marks over, we're surviving, we're living, but we don't know what's coming next. What's happening in my town? What's happening? What is the government planning to do? While they are trying to rebuild, there is this big question mark. Should they rebuild? I had many questions people, they own their land, but they are in an area that they have now seen has been completely devastated. So the big question mark is, what do they do? Many people are trying to earn an income, trying to rebuild. We have also been working in the eastern section of Jamaica, which has not received a lot of attention, but many farmers lost their farms. Roads have been completely obliterated. Last week, I drove on a road that community members themselves redid on a very steep hillside. It was absolutely scary to drive on, but they took the matters into their hands because they were not receiving as much attention and care, and they needed access to their farms. They needed to be able to replant, to be able to earn an income. So on the ground in the communities, there's been this trauma that people are trying to cope with. Anytime it rains, anytime breeze blows, and since Hurricane Melissa, we've had a lot of extremes. We've had extreme cold weather, which for you in the UK may not be extreme, but for us is extreme. We've had some heavy rainfall. We've had some strong wind, which has only caused the trauma to just come back again and again and again. And while they're trying to figure out what to do with their lives, to do with their particular homes, they're also trying to earn an income because, again, in many of these communities, there was nothing left. Yeah. In Black River, for example, the market, to me, and I had written about this, the Black River market looked like a giant actually sat on top of it and it was all steel and it just squashed it. It really is a traumatizing experience. And even months later, as Dr. Brown said, to drive through some of these communities that are looking a whole lot better than they did in the immediate aftermath. It really is traumatic.
And could I ask, when we were doing our SIDS inquiry, the committee went to Dominica and met a lot of people who were just financially unable to rebuild. I wonder, is that likely to be a similar situation for Jamaicans? Did people have insurance? Was the insurance good enough? I mean, literally, how are people going to rebuild? And then the other thing that we saw in Dominica was, of course, after the disaster, the prices of materials went through the roof. So, just being able to buy a brick or a bag of cement became impossible.
Very good question. The section of Jamaica that was impacted would have been rural Jamaica. It would have been a mix of different types of homes. Some would have been, there would have been property that would have had some insurance, but the vast majority of homes that were impacted would have been uninsured. And we've heard, for example, where the government has said, okay, we're going to restore light, for example, this is just one utility, to the main roads. But then it is now, we can't then get the electricians to come in because many of these homes were flooded and everything will need to be rewired. So this is just the homes that are standing. But for those that are not, we've seen where private sector has really come. Private sector and other NGOs and groups, sometimes just individuals that have money to do it. They've just gifted homes. Some of them are temporary homes, which has caused a lot of concern for many of the people in the engineering community, because that's exactly why we have this issue of homes being destroyed. Many of these homes had land tenure issue, meaning many of the land that many people had their own homes built on, they didn't own them. Yeah. And so therefore it was difficult for them to build permanent homes. And so what the thing is, when we're going to rebuild, we need to rebuild in a way that does not continue the legacy issues that we've been facing, but also it builds back better. So many people have been talking about the issue of land tenure and about how we rebuild, that we know that there is this need for people to have immediate shelter, but we must be careful that this immediate shelter does not become permanent.
Yeah. Let me bring in Dr. Brown and then go to Una.
Yeah, so we asked about, what worked, and churches were, they really came from faith leaders, once again, when we were there, we were able to go and visit 6 churches, and even though they were devastated, what they done, they brought in their members to then go and spread the food and the love into different parts of the country as well. So that was really good. The local community groups and organisations in the UK, we're talking about, just for our particular organisation, I think we managed to end up doing 2 40-foot containers worth of material which we were able to send down. But the love shown from the people in the UK, and I'm not just saying Croydon, I'm saying London, I'm saying we had people from Newcastle going as far.
Even Newcastle.
And she emailed me yesterday, that's why I remembered, she wanted to know how it all went. But she sent down some funds and sent down some products to us. The Alumni Association, so, people who used to go to schools, and what we noticed was the schools then asked the people who used to go to the schools, can they now start helping to send stuff back into their country? So we were now working with people from 30 or 40 or 50-year-olds saying, I used to go to Manning School, or I used to go to this school, and they then started to send equipment, send money down.
Was that largely the Jamaican diaspora?
Exactly, yeah, definitely. NGOs, so we're lucky enough that we worked in partnership with the Jamaican Coconut Industry Board, and they were the ones who actually looked after the UK group when we went over there. Without them looking after us, we would have just been walking into a country without no guidance and support. But they managed to look after us and to make sure that everywhere we went was safe and protected. Business owners, we went and had to buy food when we were in Jamaica, but what they done, they gave us a big discount, so they knew what we were here for. So they said, instead from charging us the normal prices, they charged us less prices. Social media organizations, they wanted to follow us, they wanted us to be kept up to date. By doing that meant that more money was then donated to us, which then meant that we can then give it out when we reached out into Jamaica, and as you mentioned, the UK and the Jamaica diaspora.
Let me pause you there. UnaMay, was there anything you wanted to add about?
I wanted to pick up on something that Dr. Brown said about the churches, because I think I just came out of Black River 2 weeks ago and did a drive-through of all the areas as well. And one of the things that all the churches, which are the cultural assets, a lot of the 300-year-old churches, all destroyed. But the church are the faith leaders. I mean, these are churches that are part of the national asset and so, but they were all flattened, so you can understand. And this is part of where people were able to gather, people practice their faith, but they were gone. And so what Theresa said about the trauma that you still see, and I think one of the things that we don't pay much attention to is this disaster trauma. People are still traumatized. I visited a couple of weeks ago 5 health centers. Yeah. And the nurse said to me at the time that the uptick in people just coming for medication, they need donation now for medication because they don't have enough. That's where it is still, and we are 3-4 months in. So that kind of trauma that we talk about and the psychosocial impact of these hurricanes, it's still there. And let us remember that we are now 4 months away from the next season. Yeah. People are also already jittery and talking about what is it. And if you go on the ground now, any committee member, things are almost still the same as Dr. Brown 3 weeks when you came, and I visited 2 weeks ago, and I visited 3 weeks after. Black River, the rubble is still on the side of the road. The people are still looking up in the ceiling. Some of the tarpaulins that were provided in the aftermath completely gone because of the quality of the tarpaulins. It's just complete devastation as well.
Pause you and bring James in for some more questions around that sort of thing.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think what we'd like just to do is turn attention away from the impact to the response, particularly from the international community to start with, and then we'll dig into the UK specifically, if that's okay. So just starting more broadly with the international community, UnaMay, how would you describe the speed and effectiveness of that international response to the scale of what you saw in Jamaica?
As is always, James, and thanks for the question. I think the international community, as always in any disaster, and I've lived through many, from Ivan, from Gilbert, and so, the response from the international community has been tremendous. But there are challenges. So we'll come to the challenges afterward. Because there is no question that the response has been overwhelming. And what the response is, the disaster response from the international community, especially in Jamaica, has been overwhelming. I mean, people just came in, but also not only the international community, but philanthropies and private individuals, as Theresa said, and the private sector who live and work in a bubble here in Kingston where we live. It has been tremendous, and there is no question about it. And therefore, the people on the ground at the time felt as if they were seen and noticed.
Dr. Rodriguez-Moodie, would you share that view?
Yes, I definitely agree. Jamaica has holds a heartstring for many people around the world. We've influenced many. We've touched the lives of many through our music, our culture. And I think that what was really overwhelming for all of us was to see the level of generosity that was shown. I know of many that wanted to do immediately and held back a little bit to come when, some of that international, some of that immediate outpouring of generosity would have scaled back because you need it in phases, right? And we've seen where this has, it has shown up where we have issues. So I think that I would say that how the international NGOs even organize themselves, setting up shop here in Jamaica, feeding. I mean, I heard from folks in Parity, St. Elizabeth, that said, we're not hungry. We're good. We've been fed. We've been fed. They come around every day. We get 3 meals a day. I remember somebody in Black River said, if it wasn't for KFC in those first couple of days, we would all be starving. They got KFC for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So private sector and the international NGO community in particular really rallied around many of the communities in the West. Unfortunately, a lot of the folks in the East that were also damaged, primarily by heavy rainfall, not so much by the winds or storm surge. They felt that not enough attention was placed on them. They felt a little bit forgotten, which is why there are some organizations like ourselves that try to focus on our efforts there where we could with whatever little funding that we had.
Dr. Brown, can I just, I won't lie, I'm a bit surprised to hear that positive account of the international response, given we know where Jamaica is right now. As someone looking from further afield, what was your view of the international?
You didn't ask me the question, that's why, because I would have, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. So I totally agree with what UnaMay and Theresa says, but there's also a different side as well. With us being so far away, we felt a little bit lost. We felt that we couldn't help as much as what we wanted to. We were watching on TV that the Americans were able to get planes in, the Canadians were able to do this, and India was but we weren't hearing anything from the UK. Because of my position, I was able to speak to people who said, no, there is stuff happening. There's a warship coming down here. There's this and this and that. But the people in the UK didn't feel like there was enough stuff happening from the UK, even though I'm sure people in this room knew there was stuff happening, but the local field, somebody's laughing, maybe not, but the local people did not know that there was stuff happening. And I think that's maybe that something needs to be changed, is that quickness of the UK. Can we do things quicker? Rather than watching America and all the famous people getting planes in, and we're doing all these donations, but then when we're speaking to the shipping company, they said it's not going to get to Jamaica until the 1st of December or the 1st of January. But we're doing collections in October and November, so we're talking 6 weeks gaps different.
that emergency
that
humanitarian
emergency
missing.
thing. And, it actually worked out because when we started to do our distribution in January, one of the communities said, oh, thank you, you're here, because one of the groups stopped doing deliveries from the 31st of December, and then we turned up at the beginning of January. So it kind of worked out. But I know that the UK people themselves felt a little bit like we want to do more. They were happy to go onto a plane. They were happy to whatever it was to get to Jamaica, but we just wasn't able to do.
UnaMay, coming specifically then to the UK's response, which Dr. Brown has just touched upon, how would you describe the effectiveness of the UK's response specifically?
So Jen, I think let me appease Dr. Brown to say that probably it was a good thing that you didn't get it.
It was a good thing that we were ineffective. Is that what I'm being told?
because at the time, having been involved in so many response across the region, people keep falling over each other, and we needed that phase out.
That's
So
right.
people who could not get in early enough were better off in serving the affected population. So let me appease you on that.
Thank you,
Let me go back to Jenny's question. I think the UK's response, and I think I'm speaking from a position of knowledge, that the UK was probably one of the first country that said, okay, we'll put X amount. I can't even remember the figure. Jamaicans were very annoyed with you by that figure that you announced at the time.
7.5 million was it? I think.
The first one.
Exactly.
Oh, the first
and
one.
people were very annoyed with you. So let me put that on the table at the time. But it came. The response came.
Yeah.
And I think part of the challenge as well is that when you are so far away, immediate emergency response takes time. And therefore, budgeting takes time. And I think it is people like us who, when we go into the community, have to say, but no, the UK did this or the UK did that. When the ship came into Falmouth, that was absolutely necessary at the time.
Yeah.
When did UnaMay, when did it get in? Do you remember the date?
It got in, I think 3 weeks after. I can check because I was in Falmouth when the ship came in. I think it came in, 3 weeks because it was dispatched immediately. And I think part of the challenge here is that people look for money. Immediate response means money, but Theresa spoke of the trauma, the health challenges, and therefore this combined response that came from the UK. For me, the greatest one was when the ship came in, when the soldiers came in, when the Navy came in, and that to bring some stability was really, really, part from me as a disaster person, was really, really very good.
And what UnaMay, what were the practical skills they were doing?
So the ship came in, and it came in with a number of army personnel. And right after it came in, then it was able to assist with the coordination on the ground. The health issues were also part of it. I did a note to the ministry at the time of what that meant for the disaster recovery. And I can send that to you. I can't even remember what my note said at the time.
If it's appropriate to share with us later, that would be most welcome.
Yes, I can do that because I did actually look at what was being provided by each agency, by each humanitarian agency. But that humanitarian help that came from the UK in terms of the different facets, the cash facet, the infrastructure facet, the ship, as I said, the ship was absolutely fantastic because that was what was needed at the time. It came into Falmouth and was dispatched right across at the time. And therefore, that for me was absolutely great at the time.
And Dr. Rodriguez-Moodie, since then, obviously that particular period of time seems like the UK's response was really helpful. Since early November, how would you describe the response?
Yeah, it came in on November 4th, I think.
Right. So yes, as UnaMay said, I think the initial response when we heard 2.5 million pounds, everybody, I remember I think it was a reporter covering it. I think he was a bit in shock.
Yes.
And I know that they since had raised it. UnaMay speaks about the vessel, and I think they also supported doing some fixing of the Falmouth Hospital itself.
And
There
the
were some
schools.
issues. Yeah, there were some
And the
issues,
schools,
and
yeah.
that's definitely needed. The medical team, I think they also deployed a medical team. Now, I think that this is something, the whole issue of the medical impact, the impact on health, has I would love to see what comes out of it, because we haven't really been hearing. We heard the initial death toll of 45, 16 missing. We haven't heard about the real medical issues that have since emerged, either due to lack of medication, inadequate, getting treatment because of blocked roads and so forth. And I think that, I'm not sure, maybe UnaMay can say that the UK medical team might have been one of the first.
It was one of the first, and it was one of the first that they did two things, I think. The repairs to the hospital, because they came with engineers, which was at the time extremely important. Everything was flat. And therefore, I think they came with a set of engineers, if my memory serves me right. And so they did some work on Falmouth Hospital, and they were repairing some of the shelters, because some of the schools were being used as shelters. And shelters were completely destroyed as well. And then I remember going into one of the community where I saw the British flag on some of the medical kits that were, or the hygiene kits, not the medical kit, but the hygiene kits that were being given out for children, I think it was UNICEF or one of those agencies that got the minister, and those came in as well.
We've got the minister coming shortly, so we can get into the details. But I'm also very aware that means we've only got you for 23 minutes, and we've got loads of questions. So I'm going to ask you to be quite succinct, direct in your answers, if that's okay.
And so there was just one final question from me, which was the balance between that top-down national response and the bottom-up local effort and empowering local people to actually move things forward in their local communities. Do you think that balance has been right to date?
No.
No.
No. No.
No, you're all saying no. So, Dr. Rodriguez-Moodie, if you can just succinctly explain why you would say no, that would be helpful.
There was a lot of confusion. There was not much coordination. There were too many questions being asked, too many people trying to do their own things, and too late we saw some coordination trying to take place. But it made that whole reaching out in those initial periods, the first couple of weeks, extremely challenging to navigate. I do believe that it still needs fixing. Yeah, I'll let somebody else.
I'll come to Dr. Brown in the room, because he indicated,
Yeah, I would say yes. I would say I think what we've done in the UK, leadership was needed at that particular time, and I must give props to the High Commission of Jamaica in the UK. They contacted me literally the day after and said, would we be happy to be one of the local groups to receive all of the goods. So straight away they kind of had about 12 different organisations around the UK that was receiving the goods. From that, then we were then able to get communication out to the UK and said that we are happy to take the donations that they wanted to do. And it was so surprising that it wasn't just black people, it wasn't just the local, you were talking about schools decided to run mufti days or wear your own clothes days back in the day. but they also wanted to donate money as well. And one of the quickest things they could do was say, if every child brings £1 into school and there's 10,000 children, that's £10,000 that can then be shipped down to Jamaica. As well as that, we had, I said, all the youth groups. Everybody wanted to do something in the UK. We're talking comedy stuff, dancing. So I would say the volunteers really were. They were already led by the local trusted organisations, and Croydon BME Forum was lucky enough to be one of those local trusted organisations, but that came from higher above, from the High Commission. And I think if they didn't do that, I think there would have been a lot of confusion of who's doing this, who's doing that, who's doing that. But I think the people in the, I would say, from my eyes.
In the UK it works.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sam?
Thanks. Just have one quick question before the ones on here. My understanding from what you've said so far is that there's different stages to a humanitarian response. There's that sort of immediate response where people need to just be fed, sheltered, medicine needs to be made available. And then there's the more long-term rebuild. And which we've not really commented, just very briefly, if you may, just say where are we up to with that, and do you feel you're adequately resourced?
I'm happy to kick off.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so with the rebuild, we're classing that as phase 3 now. So we've started to have conversations with a local engineering company in the UK who wants to fund a 40-foot container of building material to be sent down and they would like to start that as quickly as possible. So yes, we've done the first 2 stages of making sure that everyone is fed and the building's up and the internet's back and running. But we now know that we now need to be building the houses again.
And you're talking a sort of UK diaspora, civil society
UK diary, yeah. But as well as what help do we need? We need help getting the stuff over there as quick as possible.
Almost sort of one sentence answers to Theresa and UnaMay. Do you feel that currently that rebuild is happening at sufficient pace and is adequately resourced?
No, I can say no. The dollar was just presented on Tuesday last week, and I was at the presentation.
Okay.
No, and if you look at the information and the comment, what came out of it, there is absolutely no way that it is adequately resourced. And the timing is just still completely off. People are still suffering.
And Theresa, so just again, short answer, but just what's your view, Theresa? Same.
Yeah, no, it's not. I think so. There is money that we have gotten that will be, I think, channeled through the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority. But please remember that a lot of this money is not going to people to help them to rebuild their homes.
No.
This will be going to infrastructure-related projects, not churches, schools, bridges that have been destroyed, and so forth. So there is this gap, and we don't even know how that NARA authority, we don't really know how it's going to be operating. They just advertised for a CEO a couple of weeks ago. There are no documents. There's no real plan not that I've seen, for how this reconstruction will take place.
No, thank you for that. It helps me just because I shared James's sort of surprise at your earlier answers around sort of this overwhelming response, because it didn't marry up too well with Jamaicans who I've spoken to. I have a dear Jamaican friend who put it to me this way, and this is to frame a question to you, Dr. Brown, really, which is she put it to me that we grew up being taught that we're British and that Britain's the motherland.
That's right.
And then this crisis hit, and we discovered we're not British. Yeah. And they felt that the response wasn't good enough. You've talked about the sort of the diaspora in the UK, but could you maybe describe to me what you feel the UK government response has been and the level of communication and support that you've received from UK government?
I think it's about communication. I think what happened is that the UK government didn't communicate what they were doing. I said, if I wasn't sitting in this position, I wouldn't have known about the warship coming in. I wouldn't have known about we all knew about the 2.5 million because we were all upset about it. But the additional money was then sent like 7 days later. But that's what I was told. That's policy, though. The first initial is this.
Are you suggesting that the UK government response has been better than we've told people, and that we're just not communicating?
Listen, I wouldn't say that. I would just say that it's about communicating that message to people on the ground, so that people like your friend doesn't think that nothing is happening, because that's what happens. Is if you're not tied in, all you're seeing is tragedy, you're seeing trauma, you're not hearing about the rest of all the other bits which is happening.
What about the adequacy of response? So in terms of meeting unmet need, and I'm not suggesting that it's on the UK government to meet all of the unmet need, because there's an international community and there's the Jamaican people themselves, but just in your experiences with the work that you're doing, what would you like to see if you haven't seen everything that you'd like to see from the UK?
From the UK government, or from the it would have been. I've kind of got my wants as well, which I'll put right at the end. But I think it would have just been good to have maybe
doing it now, because we
I would suggest doing it now. Okay, so I would say, from coming from the community side, is having funding. Yeah, but not just giving funding out to anybody. We've got trusted local organisations that can receive funding and then get that funding out to other groups who are actually doing the work in Jamaica straight away. We've done that with 6 local churches. We managed to raise £20,000. Then we were able to release £33,000 to these 6 churches straight away, because the need was there. They were trusted. We didn't just give them the money. We had a conversation with them first, knew that they were reputable and they had the charity status and all of that stuff. And that's what I would say is let's have organisations like Croydon Beamy Forum, like other trusted organisations who can look after that money and go and do the work. Because I'm telling you, just like what Dr. Theresa said, the money comes in when it just gets lost in a whole cloud and it doesn't get to the bottom.
Okay.
Thank you. David?
We've already, I think, heard some examples, but beginning with you, UnaMay, first, what lessons can the UK draw from its response to Hurricane Melissa to help it prepare its responses for future crises?
I think if I think broadly, there are 2 lessons. That the preparedness has to go at different levels, because a lot of times we prepare with governments, and I am sure Theresa will agree with me that we have to now start to disaggregate the preparedness framework. We have to go to the communities where the impact is felt, and we have to make a decision that, and I know this is the bilateral arrangement is complicated, but there has to be a decision that preparedness is not with governments. I think that was one. And the second one, I think that we have to really start to think about is how the UK government support this coordination with the international community, because really and truly what we saw on the ground from where we sit was a lot of competition. And I agree with you, Dr. Brown, that it was the persons who communicated loudest on what they were doing that got the kudos. But behind the scenes, there was a lot of support from the UK government. And so I could not leave without giving shout out to the High Commissioner, who had just landed in Jamaica, I think, a couple months before, and then they got it. So those are the 2 that I think, the lessons that you can learn, that you have to take a harder role and a harder focus on how the international community coordinates in this. And there are some lessons from a number of other areas and so.
Just very quickly, UnaMay, on that, who would you have expected, before the hurricane arrived, who would you have expected to lead the response?
I think the response has to be led from government.
Yeah.
Which government? Your government?
Yes, from our government. However, since the support So it's the response and the support comes from the international community. Then the international community has a role in itself to have this honest discussion
And
with government.
who within the international community would you have expected to be leading?
Should I say that?
Yes.
because I think we broad brush this international community as everybody. And so nobody takes responsibility. And I think that is what is happening. That we say the international community, but there is really no ownership and no responsibility. And therefore, how do we regain some autonomy in ourselves without losing the sovereignty on the one of Jamaica, but also losing our national, when I say national, I'm talking about UK government, the US government. The international community also involves the agencies, the financial agencies. Who takes charge, and how do we have a collective discussion as to who will support Jamaica? The international community themselves have to take that kind of responsibility and have that honest discussion among themselves.
UnaMay, I'm going to stop you there, but I will say that there's, I think, about 200 UN organisations.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we'll have a dig around and see if we can find the answer to your question. Can I go to Janet, please?
Agree.
Hi, thank you. Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for all of your contributions so far. So my question, I just want to just share a little bit of information with you first. First of all, I'm really sorry you found the situation in which you found yourself in Jamaica. It's a climate catastrophe. You know, climate change is a global responsibility, and this shouldn't have happened to Jamaica or the small islands. Things need to be put in place to prevent all of this, but also to make sure the right emergency support is in place for islands such as Jamaica when these awful situations take place. I represent a very diverse community myself, and probably the most Caribbean people are in my borough in southeast London, and it's good to meet you in person, Dr. Brown. I've spoken to you before, and my own community, many Jamaicans met with me publicly. They were very frustrated, very annoyed, very worried about their family members and the situation that was taking place around the Hurricane Melissa, and they continue to be worried and concerned as well. So my question, and also I'm from a Jamaican background on my mother's side as well, but my question is very much about what ask do you have now of the UK government, and what do you think the UK government should be doing now? Because if I'm correct, it still remains a constitutional monarchy with King Charles as the head of state. And I just want to say, you know, it'd be really helpful for us to hear how seriously you're taking this, and also to know what those asks are of the UK government, but also of NGOs, and also of the British Jamaican diaspora community, because there is much more that needs to be done. From what I've read and what I'm aware of, it's 450 schools were destroyed, 100 health centres, 150 roads. Water isn't restored everywhere. There's a huge issue to do with medicines, to do with airborne diseases. So it's a very serious situation. And what you say now will help inform us, and also help inform the government, NGOs, and also diaspora in terms of going forward of what support and help and ask do you have. And if I could come to you first, Dr. Rodriguez-Moodie, please.
Okay, thank you. A very good question. I might be answered in two parts, really. I think that when we look at the humanitarian aid aspect of it, you've already, some of you have already answered it in terms of we need it to be, if I can say, feasible in phases, scalable. We are looking at disasters that are going to be at the catastrophic level more and more. And so therefore, there has to be some kind of mechanism to allow humanitarian aid to be more adaptable and flexible to the needs. In terms of support, you know, we've gotten about $6.7 billion US in international support. but the scale of the damage has been estimated to be about 8.8 billion, 41% of our GDP. And most of the package it's blended, but most of it are loans. And so when we talk about loss and damage, here it is last year, Jamaica had been recording really great economic growth gains. And then we have a disaster that comes and just sets us back many decades to be able to start all over again. We're getting funding, yes, to try and rebuild, but most of it is loans that we now have to find a way to repay. And so when I think about support, this is something that we need more grants, not loans, essentially. And those grants are going to be very important in terms of adaptation projects to help Jamaicans to be able to bounce back even faster after a disaster like Hurricane Melissa.
Oh, okay, thank you. And UnaMay, if I come to you.
I think that just continuing on from where Theresa, we are in total damage, loss and damage, and therefore the sectors that we want to focus on, agriculture and tourism. But I also want to go back to say that we have to also, and this is probably where the UK government can be strongest in terms of the institutions, because we heard the chaotic nature of the response. How do we strengthen some of the institutions at different levels, at the national level, but at the local level, to be able to manage this response when it is needed most? And I think that is one thing that, if I have to put it on the table, that we don't invest enough in institutions. So the SEDEMA, the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, and it is no secret what happened there. The response from the institutions that are tasked, and I think it went back to the question before, that were tasked to coordinate this response, was just not there. And therefore, how do we then use institutions that are set up, that are credible, at national level, local level, to support this response?
Would you say,
that's something that I would put on the table.
An area of need is coordination and strategy, because it sounds quite overwhelming as well. Dr. Brown, would you?
I would say what I found out in the last 3 to 4 months is the diaspora expertise that we have in the UK. I think we need to use them more. I think everything isn't always about money. It's about actually using the contacts that we have and bringing them in. How can we get them to do more in the UK, but also in Jamaica and other parts of the Caribbean? We have to be real. You know, hurricane season's coming up soon. You know, it might not be Jamaica, it might be another country next time. How do we support the smaller countries in the Caribbean? So I would definitely say, how do we embed diaspora expertise into the UK system, so that we can do things quicker next time, so all due respect, so that we don't always have to rely on the government. Can we do stuff quicker from our UK people themselves?
I mean, the view is the government still does have a responsibility, and even if you're using people's expertise, there's still a cost that comes with that. And I think there's a level of realism that's very much needed in all of that interpretation. Thank you, Chair.
Noah.
Thank you. I think, UnaMay, you started to get to this question already with your comment about institutions, but what developmental and environmental challenges is Jamaica facing in the long term, if you can briefly add anything to what you said earlier?
Well, we are a small island developing state where this is a cyclical issue. We have a hurricane almost now every year. So that impacts really the development trajectory of any country, and there's no question about that. So that's the challenge that we face. And therefore, because of that, then the fiscal risk that comes with that, we are financially challenged because we have to borrow ourselves out of another hurricane. And as Theresa said, despite the magnitude of resources that came in, we still have to borrow to meet some of the fiscal needs still. So it's really cyclical. There's no question about it. And I think we have spoken about this, about what do we borrow for and how much more debt will this Hurricane Melissa put a Jamaica economy that was on a growth trajectory in? That's really the question. I mean, we have been integrating climate risk into our development planning for a long time, and the UK has supported that. But what else? What else?
And Dr. Rodriguez-Moodie, would you add anything to that?
Yes, I would add that one of the challenges that we now face is as we enter an era of more loans to finance that debt, you tend to need development that creates foreign exchange. And those same industries are very extractive and destructive to the environment. And this is the bind that small island states like ourselves are constantly faced with, that the very destructive, extractive industries that are important for servicing loans and debts because it generates foreign exchange are the very same industries that we're advocating to be phased out because they're so destructive, not just to the natural environment, but to public health.
Which industries?
Well, we're looking at our bauxite alumina industry. We have other aspects of mining as well. Tourism can also be considered extractive depending on how you look at it. So, yeah.
Well, it would be certainly very interesting to review some of our climate resilience asks from the FCDO side on that industry. How can international partners, do you think, such as the FCDO, support Jamaica in effectively addressing a few of those challenges that you mentioned? If I come back to you, UnaMay.
As I said, we have to strengthen the delivery capability of our institution, and I go back there. But we also have to strengthen the capacity and education of not only of our citizens. Dr. Brown spoke about the diaspora and the embedding the diaspora expertise, but there are so much expertise that exists across the region. How do we strengthen this capacity to be able to respond in one way? And then the education of our policymakers, I make no apologies to say that. It's really nice to have, but it is a climate priority at this time, because one wrong decision can stifle progress for years and years and years. And I think those are some of the acts. A standing roster of climate of Caribbean expertise could be one simple act that we can draw on, as you say, Dr. Brown, not only from the diaspora, but from the Caribbean, that could aid the response at this time. And I come back again, the institutions, the shelters, a lot of the shelters and the hospitals, so that we can respond to the health crisis, the education crisis that we exist, and this whole role of coordination that I spoke about earlier.
Thank you.
Thank you. I said at the beginning that we're very fortunate that we've got the Special Envoy for Small Island Developing States. The government has just released its strategy for them for 26 to 30, which this committee welcomes very much, and I think we'll go into a bit more detail with the next set of panellists. But first, could I just pass to David?
Yes, can I ask you first, UnaMay, given the UK's limited resources, which areas of focus should the government seek to prioritise in its work with Jamaica and other small island developing states? And in terms of resources, I should have said, in terms of the decisions the government's made in terms of how it will prioritise its funding.
I go back, and I cannot stress enough based on what I see. Thank you for the question. The institutional strengthening to include that accountability framework, which we really see lacking now in some of the response. would be one area with the limited funding that you have already experience in supporting. I mean, institutions like the CRIF and the SEDEMA, which you have already supported, would just strengthening and deepening those institutional mechanisms that with adequate, as I said, accountability framework. And secondly, I think we concentrate on what was damaged, but I also think that we have to look at what was not damaged and why. Because sometimes we forget that there were things that stood up, and therefore why, and continue to invest there. And I can give one example from the UK. Was when we were working on the smart hospitals, that project. And I think if you look back on it, that was a UK initiative. That hospital stood up. Or that health, or the smart health center, I can't remember, but I followed that because I did quite a bit of work when we were doing the JSTRAT. Look at what was not damaged, and therefore what have you invested in the past that were not damaged, and strengthen that and build that out.
Dr. Rodriguez-Moodie.
Thank you so much. I do agree with UnaMay. And I think that this whole aspect of institutional strengthening at the local level is also necessary. She spoke about at the Caribbean level with STEAM and so forth, and in other areas, but definitely at the local level. We saw some serious challenges arise with our Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management. And to me, that hindered, from what I could see, that hindered a lot of the response. And there were a lot of movements in terms of where it was placed in government and so forth. So I think that that is something. And I see in your strategy, you speak about, in early warning and extreme weather events, investing in those early warning systems. And I think that preparedness has to include that response capability as well as part of the early warning system. Yeah. So I would say that that is something that as a recommendation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Brown?
Yeah, I would say totally agree with Dr. and UnaMay with regards to the red tape. There's a lot of red tape, and at times like this, we don't want to see the red tape. So the transportation of goods, transportation of moving around things in Jamaica could easily be cut down. One of the biggest things that came out in Jamaica when we went over there was there's a lot of tolls in Jamaica, and the tolls are quite expensive. So so to go from St. Mary all the way over to St. Elizabeth, you have to pay tolls, and the tolls are about £40 a time each way. So
and they didn't raise those tolls in a national.
No, they didn't.
It's the Chinese road.
I'm glad you said that. But the tolls are so expensive, and of course, if you're driving, and UnaMay's laughing, so she knows exactly what we're talking about.
So it's the Chinese road.
Yes, it is. Okay. But they should have potentially just pause that for 3 months, because what was happening, the people who weren't affected were getting the trucks and getting transport to go over. But if every time you do it, it's costing you £40 one way and £40 coming back, and doing that, that really hurt a lot of the Jamaicans as well. So doing something simple like that would really help. And once again, just the red tape of sending stuff back and forth would really help as well.
Well, as they say, you've got it on the record.
Thank you so much.
You've got a lot on the record. Thank you all very much. You do have our love and our solidarity and our support. Yeah. It's why we wanted this session, because we wanted people to have a better understanding of what you're dealing with, but also what's working, and the strength of solidarity that this country has. Thank you, and we'll now move to our second panel, and we'll speak to the Minister and his team about some of the ways that hopefully we can move forward using some of the good examples that you've given to us. Thank you all very much. You're very welcome to stay, but you won't be able to speak for this session. And if I could ask panels to change over now. Thank you very much.
you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Sarah and T.
Pleasure. Thank you all very much for coming. Our apologies for running a little over, but when we have such strong witnesses, I think it's only right to let them have the floor. So thank you for bearing with us. And also, Minister, welcome back. This is becoming a regular pleasure.
Bi-monthly, I think, Chair. I think might be the...
And I wonder if you could introduce so your remit, but also the team that you brought with you, please.
Of course, yeah. So for the record, I'm the Minister for the Caribbean, and within that context, I'm also the Minister for Hurricane Response, something I wasn't expecting when I joined the Foreign Office in September last year. To my right is Tim Hemmings, who is our Special Envoy for SID, Small and Development States, and Alicia Herbert, OBE, is the High Commissioner to Jamaica from the United Kingdom.
Thank you very much. And High Commissioner, and Minister, you did both arrive, a month before Hurricane Melissa, so it's been a steep learning curve for you as well. So we want to dig into a little bit about the government's preparedness, what you found, what support you were able to give when the hurricane hit. And one thing I'm curious about, I think it was probably 10 years ago when I was last in Jamaica and talking to the previous High Commissioner, at hurricane time, the UK would have a vessel sort of around in the region because it's hurricane season, something's going to go wrong, and we have a moral duty and a willingness to support Caribbean nations. I wonder what plans were in place. Where was the Royal Navy vessel when Melissa struck?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to committee. It is nice to be back, and always very strange to be on this side of the evidence session than on that side of the chamber. Just in terms of Trent, if that's what you want me to focus on, I'm very happy to answer questions on wider preparedness ahead of Melissa. So committee will be aware, obviously, hurricane paths are complex at best. This was the extreme end of a Category 5. When I was in Jamaica in December, I wondered if we should have recategorisation of hurricanes given what's happening in terms of climate change and weather systems. But HMS Trent was deployed around Turks and Caicos. For those members who aren't aware, we have legal obligations around overseas territories. Once it was clear, well, first of all, Hurricane Melissa sat to the side of Jamaica for longer than we were anticipating, so we expected landfall on one day. Several hours later, it was still sitting there gaining power. The course of Hurricane Melissa then moved across the island, but not to the entire island, and by the time it got to Turks and Caicos, it would actually had moved, and therefore the threat in relation to the islands was limited, had passed, and Trent was deployed on the 2nd of November, so 4 days after Melissa struck the island, and arrived on the 4th. So we always have a vessel within the Caribbean region. We have legal obligations linked to the OTs, and then we obviously have broader ethical, moral obligations in terms of the wider Caribbean.
Was there an OT that you still thought might be at risk, which is why there was the pause of 4 days?
Well, no. So it was the 2nd of November. It was deployed, and the hurricane hit on the 28th and was on landfall for at least a day. Fall for at least 2nd of November.
Yeah, and it was 28th.
It's on the 28th of October. So within 4 days, the threat to Turks and Caicos was much more limited, and then it was deployed. Within 4 days, and arrived 2 days after that. That's purely a logistical issue of just travelling to get to Jamaica.
Okay. Do you think it was adequate? Would you do anything different?
In terms of Trent?
That first initial deployment of Trent.
I think the wider issue that we have to accept is that we'd already sent a number of nurses, doctors, midwives, engineers, hurricane response specialists, but already in Miami. we already had, through preparedness conversations, so long before Melissa even struck, making sure that we had supplies and people in positions, including in Miami and in Antigua and Barbuda. So we'd already had all this preparedness work done long before Melissa had actually struck. This wasn't so much about Melissa, it's about having the resources in the Caribbean.
And that's a standard
yes,
thing that
so
we do.
you know, so I'm more than happy to go into detail, but the preparedness takes place constantly around hurricane response, so that the UK government are able to respond to any country that has that scale of hit or a lower category, whatever the response may be. We have that preparedness work going on. The team that was sent over, so we had people, the High Commissioner will remind me, I'm sure, we had people on the ground within about 24 hours, because we had flown people to Miami in preparedness to get them to Jamaica. The delay, frankly, was the inability to open airports.
Absolutely.
So we obviously, you know, I have an obligation, High Commissioner Tim has an obligation around our own teams. So part of it, you know, and I didn't in any way live it in the way the Jamaicans did, but I can assure committee I was in the crisis centre before, during and after the response in London, and was the first minister globally to be in Jamaica at the beginning of December to see the response. So I take my responsibilities seriously, as I hope committee will appreciate. But part of that is also the High Commissioner's obligations and my obligations within the department for our staff on the ground. So we obviously had staff that quite literally lived through the hurricane in Kingston, and therefore we had to sort of make sure that infrastructure was in place whilst High Commissioner was WhatsApping ministers in a never more should be a lesson in WhatsApp diplomacy, as she'd been in country 4 weeks, which is quite a quick way to have to engage with ministers when you get such a terrible event happening there. So partly logistics, partly the weather, partly getting airports open was the initial delay.
And Minister, because I'd been there and met previous High Commissioners, I knew about this amazing facility that we have and are able to deploy at very short notice. But I go to Dr. Brown's point, which is the UK doesn't communicate that to the UK, but also from our witnesses, it doesn't sound as though that got communicated around Jamaica. So I think the only thing that really got communicated was the 2.5 million, which was then seen as, for the scale of the problem, 2.5 million is poor. But actually what you're saying is we do have this ground team that were there within 24 hours. Mm-hmm. So is there something that needs to be looked at about how we communicate what the UK does and what the UK does well?
So a couple of points in that. I mean, on the 2.5 million, that was the 29th of October. On the 31st of October, there was an extra 5 million announced. On the 10th of November...
Mr. I'm not... that's all on record.
But I think there is a point about the funding that was suggested previously, was there was just this one lump sum, which
Minister,
actually was responding to the needs in Jamaica.
I'm trying to throw you a line here, Minister. What I'm saying is our response was good. Within 24 hours, we had people on the ground. We had people, nurses, medical staff, waiting in Miami in case something like this happened. But that wasn't communicated either to the UK or Jamaica. Is that something you need to work on?
I mean, I think I'm happy to say that we should look at communication in the UK, but having been there and met people who have benefited from the UK funding, whether that's in physical signs of the Union flag running alongside organisations or using Instagram, Facebook, etc., other platforms are available. What I met with people in Jamaica was people that actually knew we'd given this support. However, there is, Ms Davey and I, we had a number of surgeries in this case for members of Parliament with Jamaican diaspora across London, Birmingham, Watford, I forget other bits of the UK, forgive me. And what we need to do, and I actually did this in a couple of cases, was share things via WhatsApp, which seems to be people's chosen tool of communication. So one of the lessons learnt that I want to look at for any other response is actually this sort of internal communication within sort of the UK context of how people communicate. So I can recall a conversation with a colleague who said, well, you've put absolutely nothing out on social media, and I sent them a link to every platform that I and the FCDO have and that the Foreign Secretary has, and they said, I don't follow any of these. And there were 5 different types of platform being used. So in some ways, I'm more than happy to learn a lesson around comms internally within the UK, particularly WhatsApp. That is definitely something where we need to sort of share, I can't think what the word is, unedited videos, so the bare video, so you can share it on your own platform. But when you do then get told, well, I don't follow Instagram, Facebook, X, Blue Sky, and there was another. I was like, well, I'm not quite sure what else you'd like me to do. We could only put so much out. We were very clear in support for British nationals and Jamaican nationals in Jamaica around the support we were providing, and we actually put out what I would consider sort of more human interest stories to try and explain the support that we're offering, but also that we can provide, so that people actually understood if they wanted to reach out to us. And bear in mind, we did receive thousands of calls through the consular service, that actually they could come to us with anything. But I completely accept the internal conversation was the challenge.
But all of that was after Melissa hit land. What I'm saying is, do you think you should be doing more upstream to make both the British people and the Jamaican people in this instance more aware? Because I've had 3 witnesses in front of me who are all pretty expert in this, all saying, aside from the money, we didn't know what the UK was doing. Afterwards, a lag, they did. There's a gap there. We're not selling ourselves, Minister.
I mean, I think on the context of not selling ourselves and the work that we do, I mean, one of the interesting stats is that there's £350 million of funding that goes into around climate resilience in the Caribbean. 50 million of it goes to Jamaica. And I've seen, whilst being there, the climate resilience funding that is actually spent on the ground. But I think if we need to do more in the context of saying we're spending it or we're advising on something or we're pushing something, then I'm more than happy to look at that as a broader piece of work. I just obviously think that this is about more than just Jamaica, which I know you would agree. We obviously have legal obligations with our OTs, and obviously there are 15 independent Caribbean nations, all of whom we would want to help if, God forbid, another Melissa or a lesser storm, I'm not sure, I hope we never get a worse one, hits another Caribbean nation.
Thank you. James?
Can I just delve into the team that was stationed at Florida that you talked about? So how many people were sent, and were they sent there as a result of Melissa being on its way? Was that why that group of people was waiting in Miami to then drop into?
I mean, in short, Mr. Nash, they were, yes.
Yeah.
They were. So we sent them around the storm. Yep. I can recall this rather surreal conversation about how we get people in and down so that they were there waiting. So I do have the list. Well, here we are, so forgive me. So I just couldn't find it for a second. So we sent 3 GPs, 3 nurses and 2 midwives so they could run mobile special clinics. We also sent hurricane relief engineers, people that have abilities in reconstruction, so engineers. We also had those on Trent as well, but these were people that were waiting to travel south. So we were able to sort of have that people, wouldn't be not in country, but as near as damn as we could get that was safe. Because again, to go back to we also have to think about sending people out and making sure they're not going to get caught in the hurricane.
And turning to that point, so the FCDO obviously put out advice around travel and advice to airlines and holiday makers, etc. In the days leading up to Melissa, do you feel that advice was adequate? Was there any evidence of people travelling and moving themselves into danger as opposed to away from it?
You're testing my memory, but I hope the High Commissioner will come in because I haven't stopped talking yet, which, as you will know, is a constant problem. Is that from memory, my first significant briefing, if I can put it like that, on Melissa was on the Friday before the storm struck. We had the weekend before from memory. We had the weekend, after, and the storm struck the following week. Our advice changed on that Friday, Saturday. There was some confusion from memory about a flight landing which turned out to be incorrect and that actually the airlines had taken our advice. but I think there had been some social media noise that why was a flight landing in Jamaica after advice. My understanding is actually no flights left Gatwick or any other airport, but Gatwick is one of the main airports to Jamaica, once the advice had been changed. And we actually had very, very good engagement with TUI, Virgin and BA, of course. And in fact, when the Foreign Secretary queried this, we were given absolute assurance that the airlines had engaged as quickly as possible and were equally looking at how they could work with the High Commissioner and her team on when it would be safe to evacuate as well. Alicia, sorry, forgive me then.
Yes, no, absolutely. Just to support what you were saying there, but you can imagine, even so, by the hurricane hit on the following Tuesday, on October 28th, there were already people on holiday. And already had just a few days of their holiday. Some of them had already had a good 2 weeks of their holiday, and therefore, when I met them as well as the rapid response team on the ground, when we met them, you had varying degrees of having spent a holiday in Jamaica. So some towards the end of it, and some very much in the beginning of it as well.
And so advice changed on the Friday, hurricane hit on the Tuesday. In hindsight, would you've done anything differently? Do you think that advice and that timeline was the correct one?
I think I think we would say so. We were following very much, the pattern. Of the storm, which is the Minister said was very unpredictable. There were times where we felt she was going to swerve away from Jamaica. There were other times we felt that she was coming to hit Kingston. There were other times she moved, and eventually it moved westwards. So I think we were very much on top of the weather system, on top of what Melissa was doing, which is very unpredictable in itself. So I would have thought on balance that we got it right in terms of the travel advice.
And it probably should be noted, between the 22nd of October and the 2nd of November, we issued 11 individual pieces of travel advice. Yeah. So we did try to get ahead of what the storm was doing. And we also, the High Commissioner mentioned, there was a point, not just where we thought the hurricane would bypass, but that it would hit more of Kingston. It then moved west, and then it sort of has hit, very severely 2 parts of Jamaica. But again, it's obviously an extreme weather system, so we were also trying to manage that element of it too. It's not an excuse; it's just you can't control the weather in that sense.
It's quite surreal the way it behaved.
Yes, including the sitting in the bay, which having talked to many hurricane experts now, Chair, would appear to not be a common element of how hurricanes behave. Yeah.
Extraordinary. Janet.
Oh, thank you, Chair. So thank you, Minister, for speaking to me on other occasions as well, and on this one as well. So very much appreciate that. Obviously, you've mentioned that that Jamaica receives 50 million climate resilience. I think that's £50 million, I believe. And I'm just wondering how often that is. And I just wanted to put it in context. So obviously, from what we heard from the speakers, is that in terms of the damage that was done, it's a bill of 8.8 billion. And I'm just trying to just put that in context in terms of the catastrophe that the hurricane Melissa caused to the island. And it's many people lived through that, but the worrying concern is that babies, children and families lived through that, and they're talking about the ongoing trauma in terms of what they're experiencing, and they will need ongoing support. As the Chair has mentioned already, that the 2.5 million that came at the beginning, and then obviously it's then surmounted to 7.5 million. And if we look at that in terms of to the equivalent to what Canada pledged, it seems rather small considering the vast need that was there then and the remaining need. So I just really want to understand, if the UK government felt that, Jamaica being a Commonwealth member, should the UK government have done more financially? Is the UK government thinking of doing more financially? And what is the UK government currently doing to support Jamaica's recovery?
course, there's a lot in that, Chair, so forgive me if there's a bit of a ramble.
Remind you.
Sorry. No, I'm hoping you don't need to remind me, but more just to apologise to the Chair in advance.
No, but do bring colleagues in.
So the key thing to say is that we were the second highest donor in response to Hurricane Melissa, so the Canadian funding was nowhere near our level of funding. The only country that gave more funding in response was the United States.
We thought we matched Canada. We thought we both.
No, we were 8.5 million altogether, and that was higher than the Canadian. For the only country that wasn't higher was the United States. On the then broader response, so to give the committee an example, so the UK had actually done a lot of preparedness work in able to draw down on the additional funding that would be needed for recovery, so insurances in essence. So of that, the package is now worth $6.7 billion. Which in total is a quarter of the GDP that of the whole country, and of the estimated costs of losses and damage, which is a total of 8.8 billion. So I know that's not quite the whole losses, but it's a significant chunk of it. And the UK, in advance and then after, has remained a significant player in working with all multiple agencies. I mean, it should also be noted that the MD of the IMF is the former Jamaican finance minister, so we obviously have very good relationships in this space. So,
Minister, sorry to pause you. Are they loans or grants?
It's
a mixture.
It's a mix in terms of the $6.7 billion. So that is the UK's role in a lot of that is not only technical, but also in the fact that over a number of years we've actually been lobbying with countries across the Caribbean to have a more sort of flexible approach to the instruments used by the international financial institutions. So what you see happening in Jamaica was, in a sense, a new way in which this is being done, about delaying repayments, for example, about having a lot more flex in current or existing loan agreements.
What about reduced interest rates?
And all those sorts of what should I say, sort of changes being made to the tools that are used by the IMF. Are hugely, hugely important. And the UK has been very much at the forefront, advocating with countries across the Caribbean and other SIDS, for example, other vulnerable countries, for a change in the way in which the debt is actually treated. So I think that's, our advocacy role in there is hugely important.
Is that having any impact?
Yes, because I think that is what's generating now the $6.7 billion, which we can talk about, which will be used in a sense for reconstruction and part of NARA, the National Agency for Recovery and Reconstruction.
But if that's a loan rather than a grant, isn't that just saddling more debt on?
Well, I think the terms in which this would, happen, I think would be worked out between the country and in the international financial institutions, and a lot of vigilance with respect to not necessarily unnecessarily burdening countries with that. Just to say as well, Chair, some of this would be existing loans, which would then have a flex within it. So some of this would have already been debt that would have been taken on by many of these countries. What they're also looking at, and I'm not getting into the technical detail of it because I'll get to the limits of my knowledge very quickly, but also looking at debt swaps and other ways. So I think it's a balance between indebtedness and flex.
So you're raising red flags when you're starting to talk to me about debt swaps. But also I am very concerned, as I know the Minister for Development is, about loans and debt and how that is managed. So if I could urge you, Minister and High Commissioner, to really keep a close eye on that, because we've seen all around the world that's not working. And also we heard earlier about the Chinese road. China is sweeping through small and developing nations and offering what seem to be very competitive loans, and then the reality of them tends to bite quite hard when a crisis like this happens. So it's somewhere the committee keeps coming to, but at the moment the international monetary system just doesn't seem to be working for countries like Jamaica.
Can I reassure you, Chair, just on the point around the road, the fee, the toll was indeed waived. To such an extent that the Chinese government were annoyed by the Jamaicans' decision. So just to say that was done, and I don't mean it was just done in the following weeks. I mean, I was there in December and it was still waived. So this was some weeks after the hurricane, but it was waived, and there was having been to Black River, it was complicated, partially because some roads were blocked and the only access points were using machetes. So that was a challenge.
I'm annoyed that the Jamaican government had to step in and do that. One would imagine that a good loaner would have done that automatically.
Is that true of all roads?
Yes, I was going to come in with that point. I heard that some of the roads didn't survive that China had built as well.
I mean, one of the things I want to bring Tim in on the loan structure, but I'd like to come back to the UKEF part because you asked about what else
Tim,
we're doing.
Like to come in and then we'll go back to
I don't want to move the discussion away from Jamaica and Melissa, but absolutely to note the point you're making about the multilateral development banks, including the regional banks. I think all of them now, I think I'm right, have special strategies for SIDS, precisely recognising those points that they tend to get forgotten about when it comes to sort of decisions because they're small, and secondly because the impacts on them are so much greater, particularly in events like this. So each of their strategies is different. The World Bank launched theirs last year, but they all, I think, in some way sort of refer to that grants and loans mechanism, the need for debt relief at the right moment, and sort of how decisions are made on emergency funding being paid out. So I'm not saying they're perfect, but they at least recognise some of the issues you're raising.
And do you see that as a space that the UK can step into more?
I think with our roles on these banks, we're influential. I mean, certainly in the conversations I've had in my role so far, and I was at the World Bank annual meetings last year, absolutely we're seen as one of the drivers. I think we were the only donor country to speak at the Small States Forum at the World Bank, for example, last year. I mean, the main thing is you go and you listen to the small islands and what they need, but I think the fact we were seen as being out there was viewed positively.
And Chris, would you like to?
Yeah, I'm happy to come back on UKEF. Yeah, so just on infrastructure, so bridges in particular, we have £134 million of UKEF funding ready and available to go on bridge reconstruction. That could be expanded to include more reconstruction work. The challenge in all of this, and the Prime Minister of Jamaica made a statement last week, so I'm not sort of saying anything that he hasn't said. The people didn't vote for paperwork, they voted for action. And part of our challenge, and having had these meetings when I was in Kingston with ministerial colleagues in Jamaica, is around some of the bureaucracy and the red tape challenges, which is what the hope is that NARA will form part of this work. But the UKEF team here are ready to go. We even have British contract work that could be, because we're very good at building bridges in this country. We have world-leading engineers. So that work is actually ready to go in terms of reconstruction and would form part of the work that we would want to do for continuing support. And in the same vein, through UKEF is also looking at rebuilding the national stadium as well, which is something that the Jamaican government want to do. So again, we want to be part of that work.
Did you want to come in?
Yeah, no, I just wanted, yes, I think in addition to the National Stadium, as well as the work on the bridges, just to say as well, with respect to NARA, this new agency which is being set up, just to say we are very much involved in the conversations, drawing on our experience in Peru, where after a devastating earthquake, for example, that we were able to, the UK played a hugely important role there in terms of the reconstruction effort, the governance of that and how that's such an agency actually does its work. So we're very much in conversation and supporting and helping the design of this new agency. But as the previous witness said, it has not yet been
That all
launched.
sounds really positive, and I imagine that, Minister, your counterparts are very aware of this, and the officials and everyone else that needs to know within government of Jamaica is aware of this.
I promise you that is the case. I promise.
The communication is there. And just in terms of medics and engineering, there's obviously loads of help that's needed in Jamaica. Is there any other areas in where the UK government is looking to continue to support, as well as what you've mentioned?
Should I take them? I think we, in a sense, and I think someone said earlier, in the different phases to humanitarian response, and we're very much there in the very early stages, the relief items, life-saving support, emergency medical teams embedded within the Jamaican medical system, engineers, linesmen have been brought from across the Caribbean in order to get electricity back up and running, and food parcels, etc. So we're moving into a stage now whereby we are monitoring that investment, monitoring that support that we've given over that period of time. But what I would say as well is that in terms of the ongoing support, I think the real prize comes, as it were, from the work that we've done with respect to disaster risk financing, and that the Jamaican government itself received financing from their investment in these insurance products globally. And then they are making those decisions about how that is spent going forward. And therefore, I think when we look at disaster relief going forward, yes, we know that immediate support is required. Yes, we know that those critical items are. But if we are now in a space of genuine partnership, if we're in a space of putting governments in the driving seat to assess what their needs are and to work with us in terms of any additional support that they might need to determine what's actually required going forward and how to implement that, then in a sense, I think these disaster risk financing mechanisms that we have been so much involved with setting up with the Jamaican government, I think it's a place to go. So that is very much what is going to be going on going forward, because they've got millions of pounds on that, plus they've got the money for the reconstruction as well.
Thank you. I'm not sure, Minister, if you heard all of UnaMay's evidence, but she talked about building institutional capacity and accountability. So is the UK working with NARA in this regard?
I mean, the short answer is yes. We're trying to use our expertise in this space, including quite literally at a ministerial level, because when I was there in December, we were having the conversations about sort of the birth of NARA, if you will, and how, we can learn lessons from each other. And actually, some challenge, rightly put to me by Jamaican ministers about, how the UK government can challenge the change around some of the bureaucracy and red tape so that we can get the UK funding in, which is something we've taken on board. And Alicia and her team now working on the ground with the government there to make sure that we have that specialism, and goes to a broader point, I suppose, around our role globally in the development space, that where we do have expertise, we should be using it.
Absolutely.
One facet of the work in that sense.
Thank you. Sam.
Yes. We've heard calls for a temporary scheme for humanitarian visas or fee waivers. And this is to facilitate people who've lost their homes, whether children or elderly people, travel into the UK for a short period of time to stay with relatives here. Just wondering what conversations the FCDO has had with the Home Office around those schemes.
I mean, look, I hope I'm stating the obvious, but it's always something worth saying. I don't in any way not recognise the huge concerns and fear of Jamaican diaspora in the UK, of people living in Jamaica. I met members of Parliament who were talking about their own family members being there, and I also held an event with Foreign Office staff because there's a huge Jamaican diaspora within the Foreign Office, and I just want to sort of acknowledge it. Our immediate response was on British nationals. That was part of it. It's clearly a tourism hub, Mecca, whatever you want to call it, Jamaica, and we wanted to play our part in making sure that people could be evacuated. We did assist with repatriation flights, and obviously we were then supporting the people more broadly. The visa issue, Mr Rushworth, is very much a decision that's kept under review by the Home Office. So we obviously there were conversations, but fundamentally it's a decision for ministers within the department. I'm not trying to plead ignorance. It's simply the levels of where government works and the role of the Foreign Office. I mean, although actually the Foreign Secretary and Home Secretary, I should put on the record, agreed the flight response, but it is very much part of the Home Office's decisions around visa review. They did agree, from memory, so I'm going to check before I say it, that members of the Windrush generation with indefinite leave to remain in the UK would also be eligible for the support. So there was some flex shown, but fundamentally the decision around visa access is for the Home Office.
So the FCDO had conversations with the Home Office, but ultimately the Home Office has made decisions.
I mean, I think the FCDO response is around the natural disaster of it, so in terms of response in country, response in advance. But I can recall at least some conversations around explaining particular visa cases, which I wouldn't go into because that wouldn't be fair. So I think on that level there was cross-government working, of course there was, and equally there was MOD response within the crisis centre because not just Trent but the broader engineering response. So we have a crisis centre in the Foreign Office that is very, very multifaceted, and part of that team will be the Home Office, Consular, MOD, etc. So all those conversations take place in that context of crisis.
Was there a tension though between what the FCDO would have recommended in terms of looking at our relationship with Jamaica and with the diaspora and recognising the humanitarian needs and what the Home Office was willing to do, granted that the government obviously has prioritised keeping migration as low as possible?
I can't recall there being any tension, quite genuinely not. I think actually our response from sort of the weekend before the hurricane hit to the horrors of the Monday where the hurricane was sort of just sitting there, to then the hit and then after, was very much focused on British nationals. And I do have the figure, so I'm more than happy to share with the committee. So we supported 3,747 people, of which 3,088 were British nationals. So there were a limited number of cases from what I can recall, but I don't recall there being any difficulty in those conversations. There is an acceptance that the focus is on British nationals being in Jamaica, how we evacuate the one repatriation flight, then working with British nationals around when there were commercial flights available and where they could go. I can recall some very interesting routes of returning back to the UK, but we were trying to make sure that support was offered. But no challenge in that regard, just simply trying to understand how we can, build the puzzle as quickly and as carefully as possible in terms of getting people home.
No, I appreciate that with regards to evacuations and getting people home quickly, but I'm more talking about the ongoing situation that homes haven't been rebuilt and there remain people who are homeless, who are vulnerable, who have family members in the UK, who would like on a temporary basis to be able to bring them to the UK.
I mean, I would assume the Home Office would investigate all of them as and when they come through. I don't even know how many there are, in truth. Because it hasn't come as a significant figure, if it has come at all. I'm not saying there aren't any, I'm not trying to pretend either way, I'm just saying it's not something that's come across my desk.
Okay.
Thank you. Minister, this committee published its report into SIDS in 24. I've got to say the inquiry shocked me, meeting the people who didn't know if their island was going to be there anymore. So many unintended consequences that weren't considered, like, are you a refugee if your island disappears? Who has the territorial waters? All of those issues. And it was very much our report looking at how to get ahead of those and what the UK could be doing either directly or in its convening role. So we're very pleased with the appointment of your special advisor. We're very pleased with your report that came out last week.
Yeah. Last week before.
Really.
13th of January.
13th of January.
Thank you.
I couldn't remember either, to be fair,
so,
Jim. That's Tim.
So as you're the SIDS minister, I wonder if we can turn to look at sort of lessons learned from Jamaica, but more broadly looking at the whole sort of SIDS family and what we could do. A lot of this session has been focused on the consequences, but it would be quite helpful to get upstream of that and look at what we can do around early intervention prevention. So first question on that is going to be from David, please.
It is, but I want to ask you a more general question actually first, in terms of perception and influence of the UK within the Caribbean, and also your role as Minister for the Commonwealth. Because I was at the Commonwealth Parliamentary Conference in Barbados, and an undercurrent there was the increased influence of the United States within the Caribbean. And we saw their intervention in Venezuela. And we've heard in the evidence we've given, the perception of the UK response, and you've set out, the factual nature, but the perception of the UK response in Jamaica. So, how do you think that plays into that? And indeed, is there a sort of a competition of influence between the UK and the US within the Caribbean, and particularly within the Commonwealth states?
I don't think there's competition. I think we're seen by many Caribbean partners as a reliable, dependable friend and ally, both in the multilateral space and in the bilateral conversation. And that can be seen, to go to the chair's point around SIDS and take Jamaica. It was mentioned in the evidence session from the witnesses. So we have hospitals still standing where they've been struck by not one but two hurricanes in the last, it would be now about 18 months, I suppose, to such an extent was the success on the climate resilience funding for the hospitals that the only things that collapsed, if you will, was a water butt fell over. And a bit of sheeting came off a corner of one of the roofs that it saw no water ingress at all. So not only was the hospital functioning on the day of the hurricane struck, it was taking patients the following day. So I don't think it's about competition. I think it's about us just being a reliable partner. I think undoubtedly, having spoken to and obviously I'm not responsible for any other government's position, that there is undoubtedly an expectation, a pressure from the US about the Caribbean, and a number of Caribbean nations, of course, have been concerned about the ongoing issues around Venezuela. I don't mean that as including the extraction of President Maduro, but equally the broader challenges around President Trump's set conditions on dealing with narcotics and the boats and blockading and sending in SS Ford, sorry, it's not a British ship, and those challenges. But in my experience, just last week I was in New York for the United Nations Security Council meeting. I hosted a SIDS reception with permanent representatives in New York, and actually what was quite striking was a number of permanent representatives, and they are diplomats, so they're extremely professional civil servants, was actually praising the UK for not just the funding around SIDS, but that they'd been to Wilton Park for the SIDS conference in January, and that we were a solid, was one country that should remain nameless, player in the external lobbying around finance that Tim actually spoke about. So, I mean, the United States is our closest partner in many, many things, and we want to see the best outcomes for Caribbean nations, and if we can do that together, then all the better. Look at the funding for Jamaica. The US was the highest donor, the UK was the second highest donor. We work very well collaboratively, and the Foreign Secretary and Secretary Rubio have a very positive and strong relationship, as you'd expect us to. But I don't think it's competition. I think it's just a healthy engagement in making sure we get best outcomes for Caribbean nations. But I can sense Tim wants to come in. So
no, I just want to give a couple of examples to back you up, Minister. I mean, one was you mentioned briefly the Wilton Park event we hosted for all SIDS, but very well attended by the Caribbean, where I think someone called it the Davos for SIDS, because it's something we've done quite frequently. Maybe overstating it slightly, but the idea is that we have an opportunity to listen to SIDS. And the other thing we'll be doing more on a more formal basis will be the UK Caribbean Forum, which we'll be hosting here in London, which will bring all of those countries together to discuss precisely the strength, the breadth and depth of our collaboration.
And that's in 3 weeks, I think. 3 or 4 weeks.
10th of March.
10th of March, thank you. Yes, it's very soon.
Well, since the US doesn't allow the mention of climate change in any diplomatic discussions, then that assuredly would be an advantage for the UK and such.
It was the main theme at the Wilton Park discussion. Melissa was on everyone's mind, but you had islands from the Pacific as well that have experienced, almost existential events. You mentioned, Chair, sea level rise, and the ability to have that frank conversation, but also to listen, because the answers are not one size fits all, was really appreciated.
And we really want to be in a place where we're listening to what countries need, not telling them what they think we need. Yeah. I think there is we will fail as an administration if we simply dictate the terms of what a country does or doesn't need, and that's one key point from Melissa and SIDS more broadly. Working with the Jamaican government, we were responding to need to make sure because also other countries were providing support. So it was an important conversation to be having through Alicia's office to make sure that we could understand that on the ground. Sorry, Mr. Mandel.
I mean, it's interesting to hear that. In 2023, though, the previous government launched the UK Small Islands Development States Strategy 22 to 26. How satisfied are you with the progress on the 6 areas highlighted in the strategy in the period to date?
I mean, so in the letter that we sent to the committee when we published our strategy, we gave an update on the kind of specific issues that were raised in that strategy, and therefore the issues that the committee then raised. So, I mean, and on the one hand, our assessment of the vulnerabilities of SIDS and the needs of SIDS hasn't changed. I mean, SIDS are vulnerable, and some of those issues are huge global issues that need to be responded to. So the fact we have a second SIDS strategy that takes us up to 2030 is recognition of the fact that some of those issues haven't gone away, and they are focused particularly around climate vulnerability, but also around the way the international financial system works and capacity issues within those SIDS. So I think there's a recognition that those issues cannot be solved by any one country. It needs a global effort. There are marks of progress, though. I think if the conversation we were having, I wasn't doing the job back then, but the conversation we were having about the kind of insurance policies that helped alleviate the issues in Jamaica, we're a long way back then. Not every country had those policies, and some suffered much worse from previous hurricanes as a result. So there definitely is progress. I'd also point to the fact that the global system I mentioned earlier, I'm pretty sure every global and regional development bank has a SID strategy now. Now, they're not all perfect. Some will be, they come at things in slightly different ways, but the fact is they recognise a bespoke approach is needed, and if you just leave it to the system, SIDS will get forgotten. So there definitely has been progress, but it will not be, the issues facing SIDS will not be resolved until the global financial system works in their favour and climate risks have gone away, and that's clearly a very big ask.
Could I follow on from the question that was posed by the last panel of the international community? Actually, who is it that steps up and helps with the coordination and the skills and the accountability? On SIDS, they are, by their nature, small. They can't particularly throw their weight around like some other countries can. They're very rarely at the top table. So who within the international system is looking out for them, do you think?
I'll answer that question. I do think the SIDS have got much better at having that sort of global voice. So AOSIS is a formidable organisation. If you're at the COP discussions, I mean, they have very different perspectives on things, but they're very good at presenting a united front, and I'm very proud that we support AOSIS to bring that about. At the Wilton Park event, which was brought together by the UK, you had a SIDS envoy from the European Union. The Irish are very strong on this. They have a SID strategy. Exactly. New Zealand and Australia are very strong with a particular focus on the Pacific. But we do need to kind of harmonise in some ways and pull together that sort of global approach.
Could that be the role of the UK?
Absolutely. And I think the convening power we showed at Wilton Park and also the event that the Minister hosted in New York are exactly examples of that.
Minister, do you plan to go further on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the things that was interesting last week, Chair, was that talking to some of the very smallest SIDS, if you will, and was talking about their sort of structure of their civil service and their academia and their civil society, and it's not their fault that there may only be a population of 25,000 people, but of course if you lived in the United Kingdom, are we 70 million now, whatever, you know, you can obviously have larger civil societies that can lobby, you have larger civil service, that have specialists. So one of the things that we were looking at was talking about how we can offer more support to help with the technical advice to get funding, with the engineering support, with training, you know. So yes, those things are very much at the forefront of my mind, because it goes back to the point on the conversation with Melissa, that where we have the sort of technical expertise, I want the UK to be at the forefront of that work. And what came across from the SIDS meeting and from the feedback from Wilton Park as well, actually, is the UK is a leader in this space, and that we're accepted as being that leader. Talking to the New Zealanders, the Australians and the Irish last week, they also see us as being a really important part of this engine of driving forward the agenda on SIDS. So I think we've got a good story to tell. There's good work going on now, but we can and will do more in this space around all sorts of things, but also around technical assistance and where we can offer that support.
With your Commonwealth hat on, I mean, there's a huge amount that the Commonwealth and the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association as well can do in that field, because I mean, again, part of there was a very, very good debate at the Commonwealth Parliamentary Conference about climate change, but also about the SIDS looking for exactly the sort of support you've identified, Minister.
I mean, look, I think you're absolutely right. I don't hold this to memory. I'm reading it from a sheet. 45% of the Commonwealth are SIDS. which is a huge figure. And we mustn't forget that we've got 6 UK OTs as well that have links with SID, within the SIDS family as well. They have a sort of separate status, but they sit within it. Another point, 11 of His Majesty's 14 realms are also SIDS, you know, so we do have a sort of direct connection, and we should never underestimate how much the King cares about the environment, both natural and the seas and oceans and so on and so forth. But the work of CFAM coming up at the beginning, you know, you'll be aware the Commonwealth Day at the beginning of March, we have CFAM, Commonwealth Foreign Ministers meeting, sorry, Chair, and then we have CHOGM, and part of this... pardon?
It's in a SID.
It's in a SID, it's in Antigua and Barbuda, so it's, sorry, yeah, that was what I was going to say, it's in a SID, literally in a SID. And part of the work that I'm doing with my Commonwealth hat on is how we support the Secretary-General of the Commonwealth's reforms, and one of her tiers of work now, rather than the sort of multifaceted 3 pillars of work, tiers, you know, etc., is around climate and growth and making sure that we can work in this space. So I do think there's a really important piece of work to be done within the Commonwealth sphere as well.
Thank you. Noah.
Thank you. So, Minister, do the ongoing restructurings within FCDO throw a spanner in the works of delivering on the goals of the strategy at all?
I mean, the decisions on FCDO 2030 are ongoing. I mean, actually, the work around SIDS and within Tim's team, the reason for the strategy being published is because the work is actually ongoing right now, and we see it as actually being a really important part of what the Foreign Secretary's priorities are, one of which is around climate. So I actually think there's a real prioritisation within the department in this space, because it's also something that we can do at a multilateral level all the time, you know, where we're able to have this convening power, where we're able to actually lobby in this space, whether it's on reform of accessing finance or insurances. So, Mr. Law, I can't know for sure, but I'm hoping it won't, because the work is very much still the focus, and Tim's role as an envoy gives it the priority that means that Tim can access this space as a senior civil servant, but also as an envoy, which gives that status, and there are no plans to remove the envoy role, and to make sure that we carry on that work. It's too important.
Okay, so perhaps more broadly on staffing, are you saying that we shouldn't be worried about staffing cuts and how that might impact on some of the technical expertise we can bring to the table, some of the convening, some of the capacity building requirements that we've heard so much about?
And I think, first of all, it would be peculiar for the International Development Committee to not want to challenge ministers on any FCDO 2030 changes, and the Chair, rightly, has made her opinions extremely clear, and that's absolutely right and proper. The broader piece of work being led by Sir Ollie Robbins is around actually trying to be more flexible, to have more specialists where we need them, not to have duplication, which is a challenge. You know, I must, you know, in my 5 months in the department, you know, sometimes you can have the same conversation with 3 people. That's not a slight on civil servants. It's just the nature of how some departments work. But I think once we get through the next stage of FCDO 2030, then clearly it's for the committee to scrutinise decisions of the permanent Under-Secretary, but also of ministers. But I can't sit here and say there definitely will be a problem, and I can't say there definitely won't be a problem. What I'm trying to work through is making sure that we have teams in place that do deliver the programme and the priorities of the Foreign Secretary, which includes, in my sphere, the SID strategy. And that's what I'll keep working on.
Okay, thank you. And High Commissioner, are you confident that the funding will be sufficient to fund the kind of bilateral elements of your programmes and give you sufficient visibility in terms of multi-year spending decisions?
Sure, but we haven't had yet.
Sorry, it's a bit of a rhetorical question.
Yeah. I think you probably know the answer. We haven't had our allocation yet, so we'll have to wait, for that announcement.
Okay, but would you say you're concerned given some of the kind of mood music around it?
No, I can't say that.
Okay,
I don't. I generally don't know where we're going to end up on this.
Thank you.
That's something for ministers to decide, and then we will work with whatever allocation that we've got in order to progress the strategic priorities in the region.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
It's all.
It's an area that this committee really cares about, and it was heartening to hear the long-term commitment to SIDS but also to climate finance, which is an ongoing inquiry for us as well. And one of the things that keeps coming up is involving the diaspora. And I hope, Minister, that you heard and will continue doing the good work that you're doing.
Just for the record, Chair, I'm nodding, so I'll just say yes. For the record too, because I don't always get picked up when a witness is nodding. So
nodding
yes.
is always the safest approach. So we do have incredibly talented people here that really care, and I would say in almost every country in the world we have people who are fantastic advocates, and so it seems foolish not to lean into them when the offer is there to help. Thank you very much for what you're doing. I know it's going to be a long piece of work to get Jamaica back, but we really want to see her back as soon as we possibly can. Thank you all. Order, this session.